Imagine you're 12 or 13 years old. You're about to step into the dating world, but you haven't jumped in just yet. At the moment, a person's jawline, their height, their perceived social status, all of it is just abstract background noise to you. But then you take one step forward, and all of a sudden you're plunged into the dating world. You look around you and you notice that all your peers are relentlessly sorting themselves out using these highly specific metrics. Men must be no less than 6 feet tall. Women must display these highly specific features to mark their beauty and their youth. And instantly, you become hypersensitive to your own standing amongst your peers, whether you satisfy these social metrics, while simultaneously starting to demand more and more that other people meet your gendered preferences. When we experience this shift, it feels entirely manufactured. It feels like this contagious game of mirrors constructed by our peers, popular culture, and whatever current social media algorithm is pushing. Because we live in a culture that loves to tell us that everything is a social construct, it's very tempting to start to believe that these brutal dating standards are just arbitrary cultural rules that we've made up. But beneath that surface, there's a heavy, undeniable drumbeat of evolutionary biology. Men are biologically wired to seek out that bright bloom of fertility. Women are wired to seek out the fortress of security, competence, and status. So, how do we reconcile this? Why does something so deeply biological feel so deeply artificial when we are actually living it? To answer this, we need to correct a massive cultural blind spot. We're not looking at some arbitrary social construct. We're looking at ancient, unyielding biological hardware that's reacting violently to a hypermodern environment. If culture is the steering wheel of a vehicle, biology is the engine of that vehicle. People think biology is this rigid, hard-coded instruction. If you're a peacock, biology is exactly that. You have this rigid line of code, grow giant, absurd feathers to get the girl. It's a fixed action pattern. But human beings did not survive by being rigid. If being rigid with hard-coded instructions were our only alternative, we would have gone extinct the moment the Ice Age hit. Instead, evolution gave us hyperplasticity. We abandoned the giant feathers in favor of massive brain power and crippling social anxiety. We're naturally designed to observe the people around us, notice how their behaviors might contribute to either their success or their demise, and then start using those same qualities to differentiate between an unattractive or an attractive partner in our own lives. If you're born into a rugged ancestral environment, your biological algorithm naturally maps physical endurance and hunting coordination to security. But if you're born into a modern, hyper financialized society, those same algorithms map an Ivy League degree or a specific career title or job to that same sense of security. The social constructionists will look at that and say, see, the preference for that Ivy League degree proves that it is just culture. But they're missing the point entirely. The menu that you order from might change depending on which restaurant you go to, but the hunger is universal, uncompromising, and genetic. The underlying motivation behind these cultural preferences are manifestly biological. If you want absolute proof that biology is the ultimate dictator in these equations, we just have to look at what happens when societies try to culturally engineer their way out of these differences. This brings us to the great Scandinavian experiment. When sociologists talk about highly egalitarian societies like Sweden or Norway, they aren't just talking about polite cultural attitudes. They're talking about the basic architecture that the society is built on. Through massive social safety nets, universal healthcare, and subsidized childcare, the state essentially steps in to provide everything that a family needs. They become the mega provider, offsetting the physical and financial challenges of having children. The social constructionist theory predicted that in these egalitarian societies, gender differences, especially in mating preferences, would vanish. If a woman is financially independent, she should happily date down the socioeconomic ladder. Traditional gender dynamics or dating dynamics should disappear, it should evaporate. But did that happen? Absolutely not. Instead of erasing these biological baselines, these egalitarian societies ended up creating a massive unmasking of it. Gender differences became even more glaring. Historically, the female dating algorithm was held hostage by the terror of poverty. If your survival depends entirely on a man's ability to secure resources, you literally cannot afford to care if his face is perfectly symmetrical. Survival suppresses aesthetics. But when a country enabled by technology removes the desperate need for a financial provider, the female dating algorithm suddenly becomes freed up. It doesn't stop filtering, it just shifts that filter back to an ancient, raw, visual genetic fitness. Financially independent women become even more selective, indexing far more heavily for physical attraction, jawline, height, physical dominance. The desire was always there. Biology was just waiting for the economic luxury to act on it. More importantly, we've run into the immovable object of hypergamy. Hypergamy is the deeply ingrained biological tendency of women to seek out partners who are at least of equal and ideally higher social status. The Scandinavian experiment proves that the state can successfully remove the existential need for a provider, but it completely fails to remove the biological desire for one. You can build a society where a woman never needs a man's money to survive, but you can't legislate away the ancient neurological reward system that lights up when a man signals higher status. The hardware simply refuses the cultural software update. The resistance runs both ways. A 2025 YouGov study found that 72% of women still expect a man to foot the bill on the first date. Meanwhile, men still focus on youth, with preferences of women aged 20 to 23 being a constant, regardless of the man's own age. This brings back the harsh reality that for a man, being a provider, and for a woman, being youthful, are the only qualities that never really lose their value. This brings us back to the brutal metrics of the modern dating market, like the obsession with the 6 foot tall man. When women became financially independent, the expectation was that the dating would become more equal and fair, that the focus would shift to a more deep emotional connection. However, the exact opposite happened. Instead of a shift away from gender roles, the market has shifted toward an even stronger focus on hard-coded roles. When the survival algorithm is satisfied, it doesn't just shut down, it shifts to the next important survival goal, which is good genes. These newly liberated preferences aren't just enlightened or culturally progressive at all. They are brutally primitive. Filtering out a man because he is 5'9" or because he lacks a certain jawline is just as tethered to our evolutionary past as filtering him out because he has low crop yield in the ancient times. And this biological reality clashes with the brutal math of our current times. Because women are outperforming men in education and entering into the upper middle class at unprecedented rates, There is a severe demographic scarcity of men who are taller, older, and wealthier than them. When a resource becomes scarce, its value skyrockets. This is the man who is sitting at the top of the dominance hierarchy, who is now able to demand extreme beauty and youth. Conversely, if a man is sitting at the middle or lower financial tiers, he no longer has the provider cards to play. To even register on the radar of an economically independent woman, he has to compensate with raw genetic fitness. He must be tall and he must be extremely attractive. This obsession with height isn't some arbitrary cultural trend invented by social media. It's an escalation of biological filtering in a market where survival roles are collapsing. This is what explains the sense of perplexity that we feel. Our ancient hardware is struggling to process and navigate a hypermodern environment. Throughout most of our history, our dating arenas consisted of 50 or max 100 people in our tribes. Our biological wiring was designed to scan for localized small groups. In a village where there's only 100 people, the tallest, most competent man would be about 5'7", and our internal yardstick will calibrate perfectly to him. He's a solid catch, just as much as the woman who is not perfectly shaped as an hourglass. Everyone knows their pecking order in the small group, and we're not making these extreme comparisons that end up making us feel so dissatisfied with ourselves and with those people that we are attracting. Today, we step into a globalized and digitized dating market. Dating apps and social media don't invent new desires. They act as hyperstimulus. They intensify our ancient biological desires and instincts until those desires become overwhelming. On an app with millions or even billions of profiles, our algorithm is suddenly exposed to an infinite supply of the top 1% of human, physical, and financial extremes. The tribal metric is completely shattered. Suddenly, that solid 5'7" guy is algorithmically deleted and forced to fight for his life and the lives of his descendants with a guy who looks like a Greek god with a trust fund. Our desires are not socially constructed. They are biologically anchored, but they are being violently hijacked by an environment that we were never built to navigate. That frustration we feel, especially towards the opposite sex, that increasing sense of resentment that we see all around us, is the friction of these two worlds grinding together. Unfortunately, understanding this doesn't free us from the game. But as we navigate this complex market, knowing the difference between the engine and the steering wheel is the most powerful perspective we can have. It builds empathy for their high standards, which we probably struggle to meet, while also checking the hypocrisy of ignoring our own high standards.